So the revenue receivable schedule is a second schedule that we're going to be building in this course. And what we want to do here is show you some of the really cool features that we're going to teach you so that you can know how to build them into your own models. Now, one of the first things that you may notice down this left-hand side is that, again, we're making use of these binary switches, which show up as checkboxes. And we just love them because they look great and they help us keep our formulas really simple and clean. As you can see here, we really have two types of contracts, which we'll go over in the course. And so this interface in the model really acts like a toggle for us. And so we want to be able to easily toggle between these contracts. And we can show you here just how easy it is to activate these toggles even using the keyboard. Now, as we activated those toggles, you were seeing numbers moving, but let's take a closer look at exactly what's happening right here. You can see that for this contract, we're expecting to receive $2.2 million right here in April. If we switch this though to the other type of contract where we're getting paid sort of in time, like this, then you can see the cash payments happening sooner, which is obviously beneficial to the company. Now, there's a structure in financial modeling that's referred to as a corkscrew. And in fact, this is an example of a corkscrew right down here. And we use corkscrews to track the flow of information forward from one period to the next, to the next, to the next. Very common with working capital items and also when you're forecasting debt. And we've really put together the schedule here for one reason and one reason only. We need this line at the bottom, the cash impact from the accounts receivable. This goes straight to the cash flow statement, which we're going to build later in a subsequent FP&A course. So in conclusion, we could say that we're going to be focused on revenue in this FP&A course, but specifically from two perspectives. Number one, we want to look at the accrued revenue because that's going to translate through to the income statement and give us a meaningful measure of profit for the company. So we might think of a profit check as one health check that we might do for this corporation, but one health check is just not enough. The second one that we want to look at is we want to look at revenue from the position of receivables and look at the cash impact. That, of course, will flow to the cash flow statement and it will give us another check of this corporation's health. So hopefully you've enjoyed that quick tour of the model and specifically the schedules that we're going to be building in this course. We're pretty excited about this model and the courses that we've created. We're delighted to share it with you. We'll see you soon in the next video. Let's dive in and take a look. Now, the first thing that we'd like to do just for this demonstration is we want to populate this entire area down here with a fictitious number. And what we're going to choose for that fictitious number is 7777. Notice that we pre-selected the area and then we inserted the number. What this is going to allow us to do now is hit Control-Enter like this, which populates the number all the way across that section. So this can be a really interesting keyboard shortcut. If you know you want to populate an entire area, you select it first and then you insert either the number or the formula and hit Control-Enter instead of Enter. Now, what we'd like to do next is show you some really nifty keyboard shortcuts that you're going to use very frequently. The first one is that we're going to use Control-Shift-1 like this to put these numbers into a generic number format. Now, these numbers look a little funny because we're not able to see all of the digits after the decimal. So let's expand the ribbon here, which is Control-Shift-F1, just like this. What we want to do is look up here in the home menu like this, and we're looking over here for this little icon here to decrease the decimal. Now we can do this with the keyboard. So let's tap Alt-H for home, and then we can see over here, now we need to hit 9 to decrease the decimal by 1 digit. If we want to do that again, we'd have to repeat Alt-H9 like this, and we've now decreased the decimals so we can see the number clearly. So you can imagine how many times in a financial model you may want to decrease the decimals or increase the decimals. And each time we do that, we're going to need to hit Alt-H9 every single time, or Alt-H0 up here to increase the decimal. This can get fairly time consuming. So this is an opportunity where we'd love to introduce you to what's called the Quick Access Toolbar, or the QAT. If we tap the Alt key, we can see not only letters, but up here, there's numbers. And so far, we just have the number 1 in there, but we have the opportunity to populate that area, which is the Quick Access Toolbar, to include a 2, 3, 4, 5, for example. Let's just back out here and get that done. Now, in order to get into the settings for the Quick Access Toolbar, we're going to tap the Alt key. We're going to go up here to the top left, F for File. And then what we want to do is we want to go all the way down to the bottom left. We can see down here a T for Options, and it brings up this dialog box. While we're in this dialog box, we want to go down the left-hand side, just like this, until we get here to the Quick Access Toolbar. It's going to default here to Popular Commands. Let's change this drop down to say All Commands. And now what we want to do is we want to look for the ability to increase decimal. So I'm going to tap the I here, and we're going to look for increase. And there we see increase decimal there. We're going to click Add, and that brings it across over here into our QAT. What we also want is the ability to decrease the decimal. So now I'm going to tap D, and we can go down and start hunting for decrease the decimal. Let's just find that over here, decrease decimal, and we can also add that to the Quick Access Toolbar. Once that's been completed, let's go down here and click the OK button, and now we can see increase decimal and decrease decimal are up there in our Quick Access Toolbar. So let's take a look at how this is going to work. We still have the numbers selected. Let's tap Alt on our keyboard, and we can see a number 2 here for increasing decimal. So now we're just going to tap 2, and we've increased the decimal. So we can essentially highlight these and say Alt 2 or Alt 3 to decrease, and it's a really fast way to change the number of decimals. So what you want to think about as you're designing your keystrokes and your workflow is you want to think about using the Quick Access Toolbar for the certain commands which have a lot of keystrokes and are also very common. And we think that increasing decimals and decreasing the decimals really fits the bill. This is something you're going to want to do a lot, and the keystrokes are kind of long to do that just with a standard Alt key. This is why we've recommended that you add it to the Quick Access Toolbar. Let's jump ahead to the next video now and take a look at the global review some of the keyboard shortcuts that we've used so far. For instance, on this block of numbers, we know that we can hit Control-Shift-1, which puts them into a generic number format. We can make these easier to view now by hitting Alt-3 a couple of times to decrease the decimals. But a similar shortcut that's also very helpful is Control-Shift-4, which also has the $sign on it. If we decrease the decimals now, we can see that quickly puts us into a currency format. So what can also be very helpful is a percentage format. So let's put a new number in here, 0.77. Control-Enter. We're going to put that all the way through. Now we're going to change this to percentage format by saying Control-Shift-5, and it puts it into a percent format really quickly. So these shortcuts are really easy to reach and also really easy to remember. Control-Shift-1 for a generic number format. Control-Shift-4, why is that easy to remember? The $sign is on the same key as the 4. Control-Shift-5, percentage format, is also where you find the percent symbol. So super easy to remember. So let's start things off here with currency format. So we're going to hit Control-Shift-4. Let's put our original number back in place, 7777, Control-Enter, and it populates the entire area. Now we can't see those, so let's decrease the decimal a little bit, Alt-3, a couple of times, and we can see a nice currency format now. Now, if you're following along with every shortcut, that's wonderful, but you don't need to be. Really, you can sit back and watch because we're just going to do a little demonstration here. Now, one of the things that's so important with financial modeling is good design. This is one of the things that we talk about in our financial modeling guidelines document that we're bringing up on the screen right now. One of the elements of design that you should always keep in mind is that if you can delete something, you should. And when we talk about deleting things, we're talking about deleting or stripping away design elements to make the model look cleaner. So here we have an opportunity to take away these $signs. So we can hit Control-Shift-1, and then we're going to hit Alt-3 a couple of times to reduce the number of decimals. Now we have no $signs here. So we're at a point now where we've maybe deleted too much, and we need to communicate some information. So some users might put a little thing over here that said US dollar thousands like this in brackets. And then what we need to do actually is copy it all the way down for every single row it would apply to. Now remember, you don't need to be making these modifications to your financial model. You can just sit back and watch. We've definitely made improvement here. We've stripped away a lot of dollar signs, and we've been able to replace those simply with this USD thousands on the side. But while this is an improvement, we still see this as repetitive, and we want to use an opportunity to see if we can delete even more. What we're going to do is recommend that you go up here, please, pop into this cell, and pop in this statement right here. This is what we would refer to as a global units marker, all figures in US dollar thousands. With this in place, we're able to pop down here and delete these out. And what you can see is we've been able to greatly simplify this particular page in the model. Now that may not seem like much, but we always want to use the opportunity to try to simplify the design in the financial model so that we can focus in on the elements which are actually important. So using a global units marker can be a great way to free up a lot of space in your financial model, and then we would only have to mark the individual rows which weren't in US dollar thousands. Now that that's complete, we can pop down here and just delete these numbers out now that we're done our demonstration. We'll jump ahead, see you in the next video. So what we want to do next is define the starting point for our financial model. Now, as you can see here, we have our first column or our first month in column G. We want this end of period to be set at January 31st, 2024. So let's just type in January 31st, 2024 and hit enter like that. Now what we can do is pop back up into the cell, and we can clearly see up here the date, January 31st, 2024. But we want to actually format this to come out just as Jan, to show us that it's the January month. Now, if you're used to using the mouse, you'd be familiar with this technique. You hover over the cell, right-click, and go down here to Format Cells. But actually, this dialog box has its own unique shortcut, and we can just hit Control-1 at any time to get into that same dialog box. Now what we're going to do is use the Tab key to get over here into the Type box. And once we're there, we can hit Backspace, and what we want to put in here is 1, 2, 3 M's in order to get our months formatted as JAN for January. We can see that clearly on the sample pane. What we're going to do next is also put in an underscore like this, and then a right bracket. What this is doing, the underscore is telling Excel that the next character should be invisible. So it's inserting an invisible right bracket there, which is going to help us from an alignment standpoint. Let's hit Enter now to OK that change. Now we've made that change to this one cell, but in fact we could have made it to all the cells the whole way across. Let's use the Shift key and the right arrow to select all the way across. And again, Control-1, and we can hit the Tab key. Now the down arrow to get to custom. Hit the Tab key again, and we want to put in MMM underscore right bracket like this and hit Enter. Now those formats are now set. Now what we want the model to do is index us forward to February, March, April, and so forth. But we always want the last day of the month. And there's a perfect formula for this. It's called EOMONTH. So let's go here into this cell and get that started. So this is a perfect application for this formula. Let's tap equals, and we want to start typing EO like this. And in fact, now that we're at this point, we can see the formula name down below, EOMONTH. Now we can hit the Tab key. It will complete that formula for us and open the bracket. It's looking for the start date. So for the start date, we're going to select this cell right here, G7, put in a comma, and now it wants to know the number of months forward we want to go, which is just 1. And now what we can do, in fact, if you're just using one set of brackets, you don't have to close the brackets. You can just hit Enter at this point, and it will close the brackets for us. Now let's talk about something that mouse users do, which is a bad habit that should be broken. It's called dragging. We often talk about dragging from left to right. So with this cell in place, we could grab the bottom right corner right here, you get that little plus sign, and we could drag all the way across like this. This gets the formulas copied, but the problem is this is like a copy and paste of everything. And what it's done is it's copied and pasted the formats across as well, which has removed the nice borders that we had put in place. So let's click Control-Z just to undo that last command. So let's even try to take that word drag right out of our vocabulary. What we want to do is B. Now we're going to hold down the Shift. Key and use the right arrow to go all the way across to the end of the forecast period. Now, instead of a Control-V, which would paste everything, let's end of the forecast period. From this cell, let's do a copy, Control-C. Now we're going to hold down the Shift key, cross like this. Now let's talk about something that moves forward we want to go, which is just 1. And now what we can do, in fact, if you're just using one set of brackets, you don't have to close the brackets. You can just hit Enter at this point, and it will close the brackets for us. Now let's talk about something that mouse users do, which is a bad habit that should be broken. It's called dragging. We often talk about dragging from left to right. So with this cell in place, we could grab the bottom right corner right here, you get that little plus sign, and we could drag all the way across like this. This gets the formulas copied, but the problem is this is like a copy and paste of everything. And what it's done is it's copied and pasted the formats across as well, which has removed the nice borders that we had put in place. So let's click Control-Z just to undo that last command. So let's even try to take that word drag right out of our vocabulary. What we want to do is we want to copy and paste from left to right. So from this cell, let's do a copy, Control-C. Now we're going to hold down the Shift key and use the right arrow to go all the way across to the end of the forecast period. Now instead of a Control-V, which would paste everything, let's do a Control-Alt-V, which will bring up a paste special. The other keyboard shortcut for this would be Alt-ES. Now we want to use the down arrow to get to formulas, which is the only thing we want to paste, and we hit Enter just to paste the formulas. Now notice that there were 2 different ways of executing that last keyboard shortcut. Control-Alt-V is probably easier to remember, but the right way to hit that keyboard shortcut is entirely with the left hand. Why do we say this? You should keep your right hand over on the right side of the keyboard to use the number pad and also for hitting the Enter key. So some people definitely find that hitting Control-Alt-V all with that left hand can be a little bit of an awkward stretch. That's why we like to give you the option to also hit Alt-ES instead to do a paste special as well. So experiment with it a little bit and see which one you like. And one thing to keep in mind, these keyboard shortcuts, I know we've mentioned this before, but they always feel awkward when you're first learning them. Stick with it. It's only going to get better. You're going to get to the point where you love the keyboard and you don't like the mouse anymore. We'll see you in the next video. What we want to do next is we want to extract the year out of the date, and we want to be able to show the years across here, right across the top. In fact, there's a perfect function to do just this in Excel, and you may have guessed, it's actually called the year function. So let's pop into this cell right here, G5, and say equals year. And again, we can just put in the Y, and then we can see function names below. If we wanted, we can use the up and down arrows. When we land on the one we're looking for, we hit the Tab key. Remember, it completes the function name and opens the bracket for us, so it's saving time. It's looking for the serial number. For the serial number, we can just point down to this cell, G7, and hit Enter. And as we can see, it's extracted the year from that date. Let's practice some keystrokes now that you're going to use quite frequently. Let's pop into this cell and say Control-C for a copy. We're going to use the Shift key to highlight all the way across. And remember, either Alt-ES or Control Control Alt V, whichever you prefer, and then the down arrow and tap Formulas, hit Enter, and we're all set. Now let's not forget our design principles and guidelines. If we can remove something, we should. There's a lot of repetition showing all of these years across the top. So here's one thing that we could do. Let's imagine if we were to remove all of these years here, and also remove these ones here as well. This would actually work. As we can see, we have really nice blue borders indicating where we have a year for 2024 and a year for 2025. But deleting them might not be the right way to go about this. Let's undo these last two deletions and look at a different way that we can accomplish a similar thing. One of the things for us to keep in mind is that we're actually going to need all of these numbers to physically be here to help us later in the model with aggregation into quarters and also into years. So instead of deleting them, we're going to actually make them invisible. But how do you make something invisible in Microsoft Excel? Well, let's take a look. So in Microsoft Excel, you can define the way 4 types of numbers look. You can set the definition for a positive number, a negative number, 0, and text. And you always separate those 4 things with semicolons. So watch carefully what we're going to do here. From this cell right here, we're going to tap Control 1, which brings up the Format Cells dialog box. From this dialog box, we're going to hit the Tab key to get down into here, and then go down to Custom and hit Tab again. We're going to delete out where it says General, and let's imagine right now we're defining the way positive numbers look. Well, now we're going to put in a semicolon, and now we define how negative numbers look. We're not going to put anything in here. We're just going to put in another semicolon. Now we define how zeros look, put in a semicolon, and lastly, we would be defining how text looks. So we've essentially put in 3 semicolons, and we're telling Excel that for positive, negative, 0, and text, it should do absolutely nothing. Now we have an invisible number. Now the last command that we just executed made the numbers invisible. We can repeat that last command by tapping F4. Let's go to this cell and tap F4. That's invisible, invisible, invisible. We can use the Shift key to highlight all the way across, hit F4, those are invisible. Now we're going to highlight these ones with the Shift key, tap F4, those are invisible as well. We're all done. Now that you know how to make things invisible, you're going to have to decide whether or not you're going to use your powers for good or for evil. Let's imagine that a colleague steps away from his or her computer, and you pop on for a moment. Let's go down here to a cell here and hit Control A to select all. With everything selected, we could hit Control 1, and then we could use the Tab key to get down to Custom, over here to General, 3 semicolons, and hit Enter. The entire spreadsheet is now invisible. Let's undo that before we forget. So there's a little Excel trick that you can keep in your back pocket in case you need it one day. Now, before we forget, let's look at over here at the alignment. You can see we have a little bit of an alignment issue there. What we need to do is put Enter. The entire spreadsheet is now invisible. Let's undo that before we forget. So there's a little Excel trick that you can keep in your back pocket in case you need it one day. Now, before we forget, let's look at over here at the alignment. You can see we have a little bit of an alignment issue there. What we need to do is put an invisible right bracket right here. So we're going to pop into the cell, Control 1, and hit Tab, down here to Custom, over here, and we're going to put in a 0 as a placeholder for this number, and then underscore right bracket and hit Enter. Now we can just pop over to this cell here for 2025, use F4 to repeat the last command, and we're all set. Now what we want to do is progress down into this row here, and we want to get this set up to display quarters. Now, if Microsoft Excel had a quarters function, it would be really easy, but it doesn't. But it does have a month function. Let's start with the month function and see how we can leverage that to actually get us quarters. So here's where we want to start. In this particular cell, if you could just tap equals, and we're going to type in month, M-O, like this. We can already see down here using the arrows, there's month. So let's tap the Tab key right now, and it's looking for a serial number, just like the year function. So we're going to point down to this date and then hit Enter, and we can see it's extracting month 1. Now what we're going to do quickly in this cell, but you don't have to do this on your model, is we're going to change the alignment. So this is left aligned for this demonstration. So Alt H for home, and now what you can see over here in terms of alignment is you can see an AL for left alignment. So we're going to go AL, and that's left aligned. And one thing that we will ask you to do is practice copying and pasting across. Copies a Control C, use that Shift key all the way across, Alt ES or Control Alt V, go down to Formulas and hit Enter. So now we have all the months displaying correctly all the way across the model. Now the key to understanding how to get quarters is to understand that the first 3 entries all the way across, Alt ES or Control Alt V, go down to Formulas and hit Enter. So now we have all the months displaying correctly all the way across the model. Now the key to understanding how to get quarters is to understand that the first 3 entries, Alt ES or Control Alt V, go down to Formulas and hit Enter. So now we have all the months displaying correctly all the way across the model. Now the key to understanding how to get quarters is to understand that the first 3 entries are quarter 1. The next 3 entries are quarter 2, etc., all the way across, and we want to follow this pattern. So if you could please follow along in your model, we want to tap F2 to get into the cell. We're going to go right after the equal sign here and put in choose and open a bracket. So we're wrapping this month function in a choose function. Let's go to the end here and put in a comma. And now it's asking for value 1, value 2, etc. What we're going to do is we're going to put in 3 1s like this, separated by commas, and then 3 2s, and then 3 3s, and then 3 4s. And then we want to close the brackets like this and hit Enter. Now we're going to explain this in a moment, but for now, let's pop into the cell, copy, highlight all the way across, Alt ES, and down to Formulas to paste the formulas across like that. So let's pop into the cell now and tap F2 so we can see the formula. What's really happening here is if the choose function detects that the month is the first, second, or third month, it will convert that to a 1. Then if it detects the next 3 months, it converts that to a 2, and so on and so forth. So what we can see here is a perfect situation. Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, and it's working perfectly. Let's select all the way across, and we're just going to right align things again, Alt H A R, just to make sure that those are right aligned. Now let's clean up our formatting a little bit. And a decent amount of time up on the headings at the top of this financial model. But let's talk about why that's important for a moment. So let's take a quick look here at this part of the financial model that we've been working on. Right at the bottom, we can very, very clearly see which month we're in. And then above, it's very clear that we can see the quarters, and then finally at the top, the years. Also, let's step back and use the mouse a little bit just to look at this design. You can see what we've done with the borders here. And we're making it very clear that this is Q1 with this nice little border down here. Over here, we can see clearly where Q2 is, and so on and so forth. And then we can see with this thicker border over here that we've reached the end of a fiscal year. Now, having these nice looking borders in place was really critical because it helped us to eliminate a lot of design elements that were redundant. For example, with these borders in place for the year, we're able to just put the year here once. And similarly, with these nice borders in place here, we're able to get away with just putting Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 for a nice clean look for our financial model. Now, it was also critical that we use the technique for hiding the numbers instead of deleting them. Let's take a look at why that is. Over here, we can see right up hiding the numbers instead of deleting them. Let's take a look at why that is. Over here, we can see right up here in the formula bar, we still have a formula that's pulling the year, and down below, this particular formula is calculating the quarter for us. Now, the reason that it's so critical for us to have a formula in here for the year and here for the quarter is it's going to help us to do aggregation in this model later on in this course. For instance, if we wanted to aggregate the results for Q3 2024, then we would have the computer look across here until it found the results for 2024. And then we would have it further define its search across here to find Q3. And it would find those results in these three columns here and aggregate those results for us. So while it might have seemed like a lot of work to set up these headings, it was well worth it. We have a great design now, and we also have a design that's going to work perfectly to aggregate things into quarters and financial years later on. Now, there's one other part of the headings in this model that we want to set up in the next video, and that's right across here, where we're going to walk you through how to install some really nice checkboxes so that we can track actuals and forecasts accurately. Now, what we're going to do right here in order to facilitate this discussion about custom formatting, and in particular the checkboxes, so we're going to pop over into this cell right here and just drop in here a custom format so we can discuss it. Now, what you may have already guessed is that up here is a custom format that we're actually going to put down into these cells right here. Now, as you can see in these cells we're selecting, the only thing in these cells is ones and zeros. And when you have this, this is often referred to in modeling as a binary switch. A binary switch can either be a 1 or a 0. And binary switches can be a really efficient way to track things. And in this case, we're tracking actuals and forecast. So for example, across here where we're showing ones, these are the actuals. So at this moment in time, this company has actually reported these 12 months worth of figures. Now, further out here where we're seeing zeros, this is the forecast period. Now, using ones and zeros in here can make a lot of sense because it's going to help us keep our formulas really simple in this financial model. But what we want to do here is really change the way that they look. We don't want the ones and zeros to look like ones and zeros. We want them to look different, something that's a little bit more intuitive and easier to read. So let's pop up here and review exactly what this custom format is going to do for us. This format is telling Excel, whenever you see a 1 in the cell, then format that as a nice little checkbox like this. And then it says, after the semicolon here, whenever you see a 0 in the cell, then format that as blank. So effectively, nothing shows up. So now let's do this next step together. If we could go down here, please, and highlight all the way across. We're going to use Control Shift right arrow to highlight all of these numbers, and then Control 1 to get into the Format Cells dialog box. Let's hit Tab, go all the way down to Custom, Tab again. We're going to delete where it says General, and then we're going to paste this format into here. Now, that was easy for us because we were able to paste it. But for you, what we're going to ask to do is to individually type all of these characters in. Now, the one that you're going to struggle with is right here, this checkbox. So let's just delete out the checkbox and show you how you could get it in place. Now, depending which version of Windows that you're using, you may be able to use the shortcut right here by holding the Windows key and hitting semicolon. So Windows key semicolon should bring up this dialog box here. And what we can do now is search for a check. What we're going to insert is this purple one right here, and we can see it's dropped into the cell there. So now we can close this dialog box there and click OK. Now, if that didn't work for you, there's another trick that you can use to get that format in place. So again, let's highlight these cells all the way across. Control 1. We're going to use the Tab key to go over here, and we want to get into this list so that we can use the up and down arrows. If you go up and down through this list, you will find that format in the list. Just make sure that it matches what we're showing here in the orange font, and then click the OK button, and you should be good to go. So this is another great example of a part of the headings in our financial model, which was tricky to set up, but well worth it. All the way across these cells, we now have ones and zeros, which are going to keep our formulas really simple in the financial model, but they also look great. And it's really, really clear for us to see that these 12 months right here are actuals. Let's jump ahead to the next video. We'll see you there. Up until now, we haven't spent any time talking about this particular company that we're modeling or its business. And why haven't we done this? Well, we haven't needed to. We've focused our time so far on setting up these headings, which was critical and would be the same procedure for any company that we were building a financial model for. So let's now start to talk about this company and its business. This particular company is a management consulting firm. And what we can see over here is that we have a list of the company's clients. And then what we're showing over here for each particular client are the fixed price contracts. For example, Atlantis Food, this is a $2.2 million US contract. Focusrite is a $6 million contract. Now, as you can see over here in this table, we're using binary switches or ones and zeros to tell us when these contracts happen. So this contract for Atlantis Food was done in the first quarter of 2024. And if we look all the way down to the bottom of the list, for example, for this giveaway contract for $5 million, this is going to be expected to be completed in the fourth quarter of 2025. Now, it's going to become very apparent to you soon just how effective these ones and zeros are because we're going to use these ones and zeros in our formulas a little bit down below to help us have really simple formulas down here for calculating revenue. But what we need to focus on right here at this moment in time is the format of these numbers. Right now, when we're looking at this, it's really difficult to see when a particular project is on or off. So again, we're going to pop up into this cell and drop in a format that we're going to use down here into these cells to fix this format. So again, let's take a quick look at the format up here and what it's going to do. What this is going to do is format ones as a checkbox. It's a little different checkbox than the one we used before, but it's still a checkbox. And then it's going to format, in this case, zeros. Instead of being blank, we're going to put in a nice little dash there whenever we get a zero. So what we're going to do is pop down to these cells here, hold down Control Shift, right arrow, down arrow to select all of them, Control 1, and we want to use the Tab key to get down to custom, and then over here, and this is exactly where we're going to drop the custom format. Now remember, depending on your version of the Windows operating system, if we take out this checkbox here, the way to bring that up would be Windows key semicolon, and we're going to type in check. We're going to use this green one right here, and then we can see it drop in, close this X here, and say OK, and we're done. And also remember, if that didn't work for you, the other way to do this would be to select all of these boxes here, or these cells, and hit Control 1, and then we want to use the Tab key to get all the way down into this list. When you go up and down this list, you should find that custom format that you're looking for in the list, and then you can click OK to that and be all set. Now, I hope you can agree that these checkboxes are a big improvement over the ones and zeros in terms of formatting. But there's one other improvement that we would like to make to this particular table. Let's jump ahead and do that in the next video. See you there. Now, as we indicated in that last video, things are looking pretty good in this table here because we've got these nice checkboxes. But what we want to do is make these projects stand out even more so it can be very, very clear to us exactly when they're happening. Now, what you've probably noticed is that we're using this light gray shading color here to indicate to you the parts of the model that you need to build. And as you can see, we've got some gray shading obviously in this area since we were working in this particular area. But for now, we're going to ask that you actually remove the shading from these cells. Well, how to do that? And how to do that specifically with the keyboard. Let's tap the Alt key. We're going to go up here into the home menu, so H. We can see over here, we've got H for fill color. And now down at the bottom, we've got an N, so we tap N for no fill. And as you can see, the fill color's been removed from those cells. So what we're about to do now is use conditional formatting in these cells down here. If you haven't seen this before, you're in for a treat. What this is going to do for us is it's going to shade these cells here in gray, and also these ones, for example, in gray as well. So we're going to be able to see very clearly when our projects are starting and the duration of the projects as well. Now, there's two really important things to remember when you're doing conditional formatting. The first thing is that you need to select the entire area that the conditional format is going to apply to. And now that we have this entire area selected, we're free to install the conditional format. So we're going to tap Alt, right up here, H for the home menu, and then over here we can see with the mouse, L for conditional formatting. This next dialog box comes up, and we're going to go all the way down here to New Rule, or tap N for New Rule. We get into this dialog box. Now we're going to use the down arrow to get here. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. Once we get there, we're going to hit the Tab key, so now we have the cursor right down in here, which is where we want to be. So now with the cursor in this box, let's use the arrows and move around. As we can see, we want to put the cell right here into G11. But here's the other important thing to notice. Notice the $ signs in front of the G and in front of the 11. That means that that cell is locked in place, and the conditional format will always do the test on that cell. What we're going to do right now is tap the F4 key. The F4 key cycles through all the options for the cell locking. And so we tap F4 until we get no $ signs, and we just have G11. And then we're going to type equals 1. So this is our test. Whenever there's a 1 in a cell, the conditional format is going to go on. Now that we have that test properly installed, let's define the format. This is another opportunity where we often use the mouse since we find it faster. Let's go over here and click on this format button right here. What we're going to do is change the fill color. We're going to go here into more colors. So let's click more colors, and then custom right here. And now what we're going to do is define an RGB code. Let's do 242, and then we're going to do 242 again, and 242. Now that we have that set, we can click OK here, OK to this box, and OK to the next box, and we're all done. I hope that you probably agree that that's a big improvement on the formatting. If we stand back and take a look at this table now, we can really easily see when these projects are hitting for this management consulting company. So what we're going to do now is give you a little challenge. What we'd love for you to do is pause the video and pop down in here and see if you can put the formulas in place here to match the PDF that we provided, and also down in here, we're going to type equals 1. So this is our test. Whenever there's a 1 in a cell, the conditional format is going to go on. Now that we have that test properly installed, let's define the format. This is another opportunity where we often use the mouse since we find it faster. Let's go over here and click on this format button right here. What we're going to do is change the fill color. We're going to go here into more colors. So let's click more colors, and then custom right here. And now what we're going to do is define an RGB code. Let's do 242, and then we're going to do on the formatting. If we stand back and take a look at this table now, we can really easily. So what we're going to do now is give you a little challenge. What we'd love for you to do is pause the video and pop down in here and see if you can put the formulas in place here to match the PDF that we provided, and also down in here, design the formulas so that you can calculate the revenue and sum the revenue across the bottom. One thing to keep in mind when you're calculating the revenue is up here, make sure that you're using these switches. It will make things work in such a dynamic fashion. We'll see you soon. So welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to pause the video and investigate how to get the correct formula in here showing the number of months, and also down below here, a formula that can calculate the revenue correctly. Now there's definitely more than one way up here that we could have calculated the months. Let's investigate some of the options. First one is we could have used a COUNTIF function. So we go down here to COUNTIF, hit the tab key. The range, first of all, would be right here, right? All the way across there. Then we could put in a comma, and of course the criteria would be 1, right? Because we know those checkboxes are actually 1s in there, and if we put that COUNTIF in like that, that would give us a correct result. Now we want to copy this formula downwards, but we definitely don't want to paste the formats. We only want to paste the formula itself. So let's do a copy. Control C, use the Shift key here to highlight down, and then Alt ES, and down to formulas, and we're going to hit enter. Perfect. So as we can see, a COUNTIF function with a 1 actually works quite well, but there's an even simpler solution. We want to remember out here that all we have is 1s and 0s. So what we're going to be able to do is just add across here, and this should add to 3. So for that, we just use a sum function. So let's just quickly pop into the cell, equals SUM, open the bracket, then we're going to use the arrows to go across to this first cell, G11. Now we're going to go Control Shift right arrow, which gets us all the way to the end. Remember, if you're using one pair of brackets, you don't need to close the second bracket, so we just hit enter now at this point. So what we want to do now before we forget, back into the first cell, copy with the Control C, Control Shift down, Alt ES, down to formulas, and hit enter, and all of those are copied. So this is actually a great opportunity for us to talk about font colors and financial models, common conventions. So it's very, very common to always put inputs in as a blue font, and then a black font would be reserved for either a link or a formula. In this case, it's a formula. In fact, there's other places on the schedule where we can see this happening. Over here, we have a blue font where we've inputted the client names, but you can see down below, we've linked up to those client names, so we put these particular labels below, all in black font. And just to highlight a couple more examples, you can see up here where we're loading in actuals and forecast, which are 1s and 0s, we put them in blue font. We've also used blue font in here where we can load in the timing for the various projects. Now in the next video, we're going to be populating this section down here, and when we get there, you're going to see it's all black font because these are going to be all formulas in order to calculate the company's revenue. Let's jump ahead. We'll see you there. Going to be evenly spread across the 3 months. What we can do in here is say equals the total contract amount right there, and we can divide that by the number of months here, which is 3. We could hit enter at month. So let's jump in and tackle this revenue calculation. Now we know for Atlantis Food that we're going to have a $2.2 million contract that's evenly spread out over 3 months. So we need to think about how this formula is going to work. Given that the contract is going to be evenly spread across the 3 months, what we can do in here is say equals the total contract amount right there, and we can divide that by the number of months here, which is 3. We could hit enter as a starting point. So this looks like it's coming out correctly. There's roughly $750,000 here, and if we repeated that 3 times, we'd have 2.2 million. So it looks correct. Now this formula is definitely not ready to copy. For example, if we were to do a copy here and then start to paste it into some of this area like this, and paste the formulas, we would see that there's going to be issues. For example, if we pop into the cell, we can see the problem is that these references did not stay over in column C and E. So what we need to do is go back and think about how to lock these cells down. So what we want to do is get back into the cell. We're going to use the F2 key to pop in there. Now we're using the left and right arrow to move around. Now when we get to C11, what we need to do is add $ here to lock the cell reference. If you remember from before, the keyboard shortcut to do this is F4. Let's tap F4 once. We can see a $ in front of the C and in front of the 11. That means they're both locked, but we only want the C to be locked. We want the 11 unlocked. So let's tap F4 again. Now the 11's locked. Tap F4 once more. There we have just the C reference locked, which is what we want. Now let's use the right arrow to go over here. 3 taps is going to get it so that the E reference is locked. Let's hit enter. Now what we want to do is go back into the cell, copy, Control C, and we're going to highlight these cells all the way across, and we're going to do Alt ES down to formulas and hit enter. Now here's a quick little pro tip. We have just copied and pasted the formulas throughout this entire area. What we're going to do is we're going to perform a quick check. We're going to go from this cell here, we're going to go all the way out into a diagonal cell and tap F2. Checking the diagonal cell, we can see that these cell references correctly moved down in both cases, both the blue and the red, but they never deviated from column C or E. Perfect. Now, the reason that diagonal check is such a nice technique is because if we check from here to a diagonal cell, we've checked how that cell behaves when we move left and right and also up and down. So if it passes the test on a diagonal cell, we know that all of these cells are working correctly within this entire array. Move is down and we have right arrow left front 4. And you can put this area 2.2 million. $750,000 here, and if we repeated that 3 times, we'd have 2.2 million. So it looks correct. Now this formula is definitely not ready to copy. For example, if we were to do a copy here and then start to paste it into some of this area like this and paste the formulas, we would see that there's going to be issues. For example, if we pop into the cell, we can see the problem is that these references did not stay over in column C and E. So what we need to do is go back and think about how to lock these cells down. So what we want to do is get back into the cell. We're going to use the F2 key to pop in there. Now we're using the left and right arrow to move around. Now when we get to C11, what we need to do is add $ here to lock the cell reference. If you remember from before, the keyboard shortcut to do this is F4. Let's tap F4 once. We can see a $ in front of the C and in front of the 11. That means they're both locked, but we only want the C to be locked. We want the 11 unlocked. So let's tap F4 again. Now the 11's locked. Tap F4 once more. There we have just the C reference locked, which is what we want. Now let's use the right arrow to go over here. 3 taps is going to get it so that the E reference is locked. Let's hit enter. Now what we want to do is go back into the cell, copy, Control C, and we're going to highlight these cells all the way across, and we're going to do Alt ES down to formulas and hit enter. Now here's a quick little pro tip. We have just copied and pasted the formulas throughout this entire area. What we're going to do is we're going to perform a quick check. We're going to go from this cell here, we're going to go all the way out into a diagonal cell and tap F2. Checking the diagonal cell, we can see that these cell references correctly moved down in both cases, both the blue and the red, but they never deviated from column C or E. Perfect. Now, the reason that diagonal check is such a nice technique is because if we check from here to a diagonal cell, we've checked how that cell behaves when we move left and right and also up and down. So if it passes the test on a diagonal cell, we know that all of these cells are working correctly within this entire array. Now, so far these formulas are generating the correct revenue amounts, but they're not turning off when the contracts end. For instance, we can see up here, this is a 3-month contract. So after these 3 months, it should revert back to 0. Now, this is where the magic of the binary switches comes in. Let's start with this first cell. We're going to tap F2. We want to go all the way over here right after the equal sign, and now we want to select the switch. If we try hitting the up arrow, it's not working. To get back into the spreadsheet, we need to tap F2 once more. Now we can use the up arrow to get here. And what we're going to do, as you can see, is we're just multiplying through by that switch, which is a 1, and we're going to hit enter. Now that formula has been modified, let's copy it, highlight all the way across, Alt ES, and paste the formulas. Let's do a quick diagonal check down here. Tap F2 in this bottom right corner, and we can see everything's behaving as expected. This cell has moved across to the right, and it's also moving up and down. Perfect. So great work if you were able to figure out that formula using those binary switches. This cell has moved in this bottom right corner. Let's do a quick diagonal check down here. Tap F2 in this bottom right formulas. Let's do a quick diagonal check all the way across. Now that multiplying through by that switch here, and what we're going to do, as you can see, is we're just multiplying through by that switch, which is a 1, and we're going to hit enter. Now that formula has been modified, let's copy it, highlight all the way across, Alt ES switches, and we're in the cell here trying to calculate the revenue. We'd probably use an if statement. We'd say if this is a 1, then divide 2.2 million by 3 months. Otherwise, just revert the answer to 0. So it can be very common to see a lot of if statements in financial models, and often that's an indication of a person that doesn't know or hasn't seen how to use binary switches before. As you can see down here, we're able to avoid all functions here, and we simply multiply through by the binary switch, which is the beauty of it. Now, in order to tackle the total revenue down here, let's use one of our absolute favorite keyboard shortcuts. First of all, let's look up at the ribbon. Home section of the ribbon. All the way across here, you can see AutoSum, but let's hover over it. Look at this keyboard shortcut that pops up, Alt equals. This is how we're going to do an AutoSum down in this cell. So watch how fast this is. Just hit Alt equals and then enter, and you've got a sum function in here. Perfect. So you definitely want to commit Alt equals to memory. Just think of how many vertical columns of numbers that you need to sum in a financial model. What we're going to do next here is just a quick copy, highlight across, and we're going to do here Alt ES down to formulas and hit enter. Another great thing about this AutoSum shortcut is it only works on numbers and it will stop when it intercepts a label. For instance, up here, if we had a label sitting in this cell here showing the amount, and we went down here and said AutoSum, notice how it only grabs the numbers and it doesn't grab the label, which is great. So let's go up here and remove this label before we forget. So we've done an example here where we were able to AutoSum upwards like this, but it'll also work horizontally. For instance, if we were out here on the right-hand side, we popped into the adjacent cell, we could hit Alt equals and the sum function would be put in horizontally as well. So definitely worth committing Alt equals to memory for an AutoSum. I promise you're going to use it hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of times. Let's jump ahead to the next video now. We've got some formats here which are pretty good, but could use a little bit of polish. Now, as we mentioned in the last video, we have a table of numbers down here. They're looking nice, but we want to polish them up a little bit. We want to do this by investigating the ability to format 4 different types of entries in a cell: positive numbers, negative numbers, zeros, and text entries. Now, as you can see over here, we've put in place a positive number, a negative number, a 0, and a piece of text for CFI. Now, what we want to do up here in this cell is put in a custom format. We want to go over exactly how this custom format works. Embedded in this custom format are instructions for positive numbers, negative numbers, zeros, and text entries. In fact, let's look up here into the custom format. It's showing us that positive numbers will be formatted like this, and the negative numbers here would be formatted using this format, zeros would be formatted using this format, and finally, finally, text would be formatted using the last format. It might be helpful here, in fact, to look at the format for negative numbers. So if we look down here, we can see these negatives currently are being formatted with a negative sign in front of them. But what we have over here is we're going to format the negatives with brackets around them. We also want to think about the hashtag and the 0 as being placeholders. The 0 is a placeholder for a number which needs to appear by default, but the hashtag is a placeholder for an optional number that may appear depending on the length of the number. And what we also have over here is a comma, which acts as a thousand separator. And what we have for positive numbers is very, very similar. In fact, it's almost the same. The only difference would be that over here, we're putting in place a invisible left bracket there, and then an invisible right bracket here at the end. And then also over here for zeros, we have the same invisible left and right brackets, but we're formatting the zeros with a simple dash as shown right here. And lastly, for text, we can see the same invisible left and right brackets, but we're putting in an @ symbol here, which is the placeholder for text. So that was a lot. Let's just take this format here and copy it, and then go down and highlight these cells, hit Control-1, and we're going to paste this by investigating the ability to format 4 different types of entries in a cell: positive numbers, negative numbers, zeros, and text entries. Now, as you can see over here, we've put in place a positive number, a negative number, a 0, and a piece of text for CFI. Now, what we want to do up here in this cell is put in a custom format. We want to go over exactly how this custom format works. Embedded in this custom format are instructions for positive numbers, negative numbers, zeros, and text entries. In fact, let's look up here into the custom format. It's showing us that positive numbers will be formatted like this, and the negative numbers here would be formatted using this format, zeros would be formatted using this format, and finally, text would be formatted using the last format. It might be helpful here, in fact, to look at the format for negative numbers. So if we look down here, we can see these negatives currently are being formatted with a negative sign in front of them. But what we have over here is we're going to format the negatives with brackets around them. We also want to think about the hashtag and the 0 as being placeholders. The 0 is a placeholder for a number which needs to appear by default, but the hashtag is a placeholder for an optional number that may appear depending on the length of the number. And what we also have over here is a comma, which acts as a thousand separator. And what we have for positive numbers is very, very similar. In fact, it's almost the same. The only difference would be that over here, we're putting in place a invisible left bracket there, and then an invisible right bracket here at the end. And then also over here for zeros, we have the same invisible left and right brackets, but we're formatting the zeros with a simple dash as shown right here. And lastly, for text, we can see the same invisible left and right brackets, but we're putting in an @ symbol here, which is the placeholder for text. So that was a lot. Let's just take this format here and copy it, and then go down and highlight these cells, hit Control-1, and we're going to paste that format into this custom dialog box right here and hit enter. You can see that what this has done is it's put the thousands separator in place, and it's put brackets around the negative number. It's also put the thousands separator here in for positive numbers, and what we have in the positive numbers is an invisible right bracket to make sure that these are perfectly right aligned. And the other thing worth noting here is that instead of a 0 showing up, we've got a nice clean dash, which will make our model look great. So we're really motivated to fix the numbers in this particular table for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's a bunch of zeros in here, which make the model look busy, and we prefer dashes. The other thing is, if we look in this cell right here and just drop in a negative number, we can see a minus sign, and we'd really prefer to have brackets there. So let's get that change done. So what we're going to do next is take this format here, copy it to the clipboard. We're going to highlight this entire table of numbers, hit Control-1 to format the cells, and then use the tab key to go down to custom over in here to the type box. We want to put that custom format in place and hit enter. So I hope you would agree that what we have here is a big improvement on the formatting, especially converting the zeros over to dashes, which really cleans up the model, and it makes it easier for us to see when there's an actual number inside a cell. Now, if you had trouble with that number format, remember that you could just highlight this table, hit Control-1, and then look for the number format right over here in the list. What you could also do, which might be interesting, is bang a negative number into this table and see how it comes up with brackets around it. Now, custom number formats can have complex syntax in them, but remember, we only need to set them once, and after that, we can copy and paste them down through the read. That there was a lot of detail that we needed to go through in order to get the formats correct to get this page set up and working properly. But what we have here is a really great system for these headings, and this system is actually going to work really well for aggregating into quarterly and annual amounts. We also have a really slick format down here for the actuals and the forecast. So we could go ahead and load a new actual in here just by putting a 1 into the cell, and the checkbox shows up just like that. Now, the name of the game with financial models is always to make them dynamic, and we've got a totally dynamic schedule happening here. Let's look at this first line here for Atlantis Food. Let's pretend for a moment that this contract's going to stretch out to 4 months. Well, it's so easy for us to make the change now. We would go into this cell, put in a 1, and hit enter, and we can see that automatically the number of months updates to 4, and we can see down here that these amounts are now spread evenly over 4 months. So let's quickly now undo that last change before we forget with the Control-Z. Perfect. What's also worth noting is that we have dynamic labels in here for our clients. For example, right here we have Atlantis Food, but if we wanted to change the model and replace that with, say, CFI as a client, then that's going to translate down to here automatically. So let's just tap Control-Z to do an undo for that change really quickly. Now, what we want to take notice of up here is the name of the schedule, revenue accrued. We want to think of that word accrued as being synonymous with earned. So we know in the past that the client has earned revenue from Atlantis Food here in these 3 months. So we can accrue that revenue for Atlantis Food into these 3 months, but we don't actually have an idea yet as to when the cash was collected. So these figures here will translate down into these revenue numbers, which will appear on the company's income statement. So this will give our income statement a meaningful measure of profit, but we also need to investigate the health of the company in terms of cash flow. We don't yet know anything about when the company is collecting cash, but we're going to investigate that in the next chapter. And when we get those cash flow totals, those are going to then appear on the company's cash flow statement. So we really want to think about measuring the company's health in 2 separate ways. Number 1, we want to understand a meaningful measure of profit for the company. And then number 2, we also want to understand how efficient the company is at collecting and managing cash flow. We've accrued some numbers here that give us a meaningful measure of profit for the company. But in the next chapter, we're going to start to put together a schedule that will allow us to analyze the company's ability to collect cash flow from these clients. We'll see you there. As you can see, we're down on the next schedule that's titled Revenue Receivables. And we have a lot of gray area to fill in, but don't worry. We're not going to spend as much time on formatting since we've already learned those. We're going to focus on getting the right formulas in place for the schedule. Now let's start by reviewing our motivation for looking at receivables, or the cash receipt of the company's revenue. Let's go up to the previous schedule here, just for a moment. Let's take a look, for example, at this Focusrite contract or client. We can see it's a $6 million project, and it's estimated to go over 6 months. So we can see the 6 months right here, and it's evenly spread, $1 million per month. So now if we flip back downwards to the schedule where we're working, we would then expect this particular contract to come into place right here, $1 million per month over these 6 months. But the critical thing that we have to keep in mind is that there's nothing to say that that the client will pay evenly over the 6-month period. In fact, it's totally conceivable that the client could have paid before the work had even started, or the client may have paid after the work had been completed. So we really need to understand the timing of the receipt of these cash flows, since it's obviously going to have an impact on the health of this particular management consulting company. So we're definitely going to investigate the health of this company from a cash flow perspective very, very soon. But for now, let's jump ahead to the next video, and we're going to focus on setting up the headings at the top of the schedule. We'll see you there. So as we mentioned, the key here is for us to focus on the headings, in particular this cell right here, G40. But what we're going to do to make it easy is we're going to here is for us to focus on the headings, in particular this cell right here, G40. But what we're going to do to make it easy is we're going to leverage all the work we did before. We're going to copy the headings from the previous schedule and bring them down here really quick. So let's now pop up to the previous schedule, just using the page up like this. We're going to select all the way across these headings. We're also going to include the actuals and forecast switches. We're going to do a copy, Control C, and then we're going to pop down with a page down, and we're going to pop into this cell and just hit paste, normal paste, Control V, like that. Now the headings that are here look great, but they're not dynamic. By this we mean, if we look closely in this cell right here, we can see there's a 1 in there, and it's not in any way connected to the actuals up above. Similarly, in this cell where we see JAN, we can see in here there's a hard-coded date. Again, it's not connected up to the top of the model. So what we need to do now is link them up. So let's start on this cell right here, cell G40, and we want to put in an equal sign. We can tap the page up button, just like this, and we can get up here to G5, and then we hit enter, and we've got a connection in place in that particular cell, just like this. So next up, we want to copy and paste all of these formulas. So let's start in this cell and do a copy, Control C, and then we're going to highlight all the way across the area. So Control Shift right, Control Shift down, like this, and then Alt ES for a paste special, down to formulas and hit enter. So these formulas are going to work really well for this particular schedule. But if we copy these headings downwards, as we intend to do in this model, in fact, they won't work. Let's investigate why. If we look in this cell right here, we can see G5. Now, if we were to copy that and paste it a number of rows downwards, then when we paste it, it would come out as G20 or maybe G200, for example. So what we need to do is look at locking the row references for these particular cells. So let's do this efficiently with some keyboard shortcuts. So we want to tap F2 to pop into the cell here. Now we want to use F4 and we want to tap it a number of times, in fact, 2 times, so that we get the dollar sign in front of the 5 and the 5 is locked. We can now hit enter. So let's do a similar thing here in this cell. We're going to tap F2 to pop in, tap F4 twice, so we get the row reference of 6 locked, and then we can hit enter. So these last two are going to be similar. Tap F2, F4 twice to lock the 7, and then here, tap F2, F4 twice to lock the 8, and hit enter. Now that we have this first column done, let's do a copy with a Control C, highlight across, so Control Shift right, and then Alt ES, down to formulas, and hit enter. So now we have the headings completed, and we've completed them in such a way that we can easily copy them downwards for the subsequent schedules later. What we're going to do in the next video now is start figuring out some of the numbers and figures in this schedule so that we can start to evaluate the company's health from a cash flow perspective. We'll see you there. Now, it's absolutely critical that financial models communicate clearly to the audience, and what we can see here in these two cells is we have 2 footnotes, one for sync and one for end. So let's take a look down below where we can see we put some detail about the footnotes here, and we can investigate what they mean. Now for the first footnote right here, we've used the term sync to effectively denote a percentage completion contract, whereby cash collection is almost happening in real time, but with a 1-month delay. Now for the second footnote down here, we've used the term end to denote a completed contract type of an arrangement, whereby the company collects cash from the client only after the entire contract is completed and with a 1-month delay. Now in order to illustrate this, let's pop up to the previous schedule. In fact, right up here to this revenue section, and we want to take a look at these figures in particular with an example. So looking at this particular project here for Atlantis Food, now if the company had negotiated a synchronized contract here, then what it would mean was the cash collection would look exactly like this. Effectively, it would be happening with a 1-month delay in this fashion. So what this would mean then is the work would be completed here, and then we can see a synchronized pattern down below, but with a 1-month delay. So let's remove these numbers now and look instead at an example where the company was billing at the end when all of the work had been completed. In this case, we would position ourselves here into this cell, and we would enter in a formula where we could grab all of these results right here into this cell. And so we could see then the pattern would look like this. We would complete the work over 3 months, but then bill all within 1 month after the work had been completed. So obviously the type of contract can have a really big impact on the cash flow receipt for this company. One of the really interesting things that we're going to see in some of the subsequent videos is that this company, as a matter of fact, has some older legacy contracts that are this type, where the cash collection is happening at the end. But what we're also going to see is that more recently the company has been able to negotiate some of these synchronized contracts, effectively receiving payment almost in real time. And as we're going to see, the type of contracts that the company is able to negotiate is going to have a big impact from a cash flow perspective. Let's jump ahead and take a look at the audience. And what we can see here in these two food. Now, if the company had negotiated a synchronized contract here, then what it would mean was the cash collection would look exactly like this. So what we want to do here in this quick little video is get a nice little switching mechanism set up so we can toggle between these two contract types. So first up, let's get some data loaded in that matches the PDF printout. Here for the synchronized contracts, let's put in 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros, and then the remainder down below should be input as ones. So what you can see here from the ones and zeros is that we are using binary switches again. And what we have here is a situation where these contracts that we're highlighting right now are synchronized contracts. The ones above would then be end contracts. So if these top contracts here are end contracts, then we would want the spreadsheet to show ones right here. And down here, if these are synchronized contracts, then we would want all of these to show zeros, just like this. But we're going to need a formula that does this for us. So let's put a formula in place that can switch, effectively swap a 0 for a 1 and a 1 for a 0. Now there's different ways to do this, but perhaps the easiest way is to use an absolute function. So we're going to go into this top cell here and put equals ABS for absolute. We're going to hit the tab key. And for the number, what we want to select is this cell over here, -1. And then we're going to close the brackets. Let's just quickly copy this and paste it all the way down, Alt ES to paste the formulas, and then we can explain exactly how it's working. So let's tap the F2 key to pop into this cell here. And we'll start inside the brackets. So what we're doing in this case is we're taking 0 and we're subtracting 1, which provides us with -1. Then when we take the absolute value of -1, we end up with a 1, just like this. Now let's scoot down here to see how the same formula works when we start with a 1. We tap the F2 key, we can see that we're taking a 1, we're subtracting 1 from it, which gives us a 0, and when we take the absolute value of 0, we're left with 0. Now let's remember our motivation for using these binary switches here. These ones and zeros are going to make our formulas over in this area of the model here really, really simple. But what we need to do now is modify the format of these ones and zeros so they look a little bit more intuitive. In fact, what we can do is we can use a format from this cell up here because it's very close to the format that we're going to be looking for. So let's pop into the cell, tap Control 1, and what we can do is use the tab key to get over here into the type box, then do a copy, Control C, hit the escape key to back out, and then we're going to go over to this cell and just drop that format in here so we can take a look at it. So with this format here, what's going to be happening is all the ones will obviously be converted to this checkbox, and then a 0 with this format would be converted to nothing or a blank entry. All we're going to do is make a small change here so that that zeros are converted to a dash, just like this. So we've added that dash in there. So you can probably guess what we're going to do next. We're going to pop into the cell, copy this format here, Control C, and let's go down to these cells and highlight them. Control 1, use the Tab key and the down arrow to get to custom. We're going to put the custom format right into this area right here in the type box, and then we can hit enter. So the last thing we did was change the custom format. So now we can tap the F4 key to repeat that last command. So let's go over to these cells, highlight them, tap F4, and we've changed the custom format for those as well. So this is also a good place for us to talk about font colors. These cells here are in black font, indicating that they're formula driven. But over here with the blue font is an indication that this is where the user would need to input information. It actually may be fun to play with these switches a little bit. Let's change the toggle for Atlantis Food by putting a 1 in here, and we can see automatically that this adapts over here. Let's just set that back quickly to put it back the way it was. So let's jump ahead now to the next video. What we're going to be doing is using these binary switches here in order to drive a series of formulas in this area of the model. We'll see you there. So welcome back. What we're going to do next is we're going to fill in this part of the model with receivables. So this is going to reflect the cash the company receives from the projects it's worked on. Now the formulas we're about to build in here are going to be tricky, but don't worry, we've got your back. We're going to walk you through it every step of the way. And as you can see right here, we've highlighted Focusrite. We're going to use this one as an example and a starting place to build the formulas. And what we're going to do is just tap the page up button to go up here to the revenue accrued schedule. And this is where we're actually going to build in the formulas right here. In fact, what you could do to get your model ready so that you can follow along is just put these values in here into row 9, hard-coded with zeros all the way across, just like this as a starting place. Now, if we were to check the schedule below, we would see that the Focusrite project is set as an here place to build the formulas. Focusrite. We're going to use this one as an example and a starting place to build the formulas. And what we're going to do is just tap the page up button to go up here to the revenue accrued schedule. And this is where we're actually going to build in the formulas right here. In fact, what you could do to get your model ready so that you can follow along is just put these values in here into row 9, hard-coded with zeros all the way across, just like this as a starting place. Now, if we were to check the schedule below, we would see that the Focusrite project is set as an end contract. So we could start with a temporary formula for Focusrite. We could look down here at the accrued revenue, and we can clearly see that that would end in this particular month. So then we would know the payment would happen in the next month. So if we go up to this next month into this cell, we could design a formula. In fact, the formula might look something like this. We could put in a sum function, and we could add up from here across to there, just like that. So this is really what we're aiming for, but it's by no means dynamic. We need to come up with a dynamic way to modify this formula so it will work in all situations. So the key here will be starting with binary switches. We need to configure the switches such that everything only turns on in this particular month right here. So let's pop into this cell here and put in place a different formula where we're going to multiply this cell by 1 minus this cell down here, and then we can close the brackets and hit enter. Let's take a look at this formula. What is it really doing? Well, it's taking the 1 here and multiplying it by 1 minus a 0, which is a 1. So it's multiplying 1 times 1 to get 1. Now let's go up to this cell and do a copy, Control C, and we're going to highlight all of these cells like this and do Alt ES down to formulas and hit enter. So let's now take a look at what's happening here in April. If we tap F2, we can see in this case it's multiplying a 0 times 1 minus 1, which is 0. So these multiplied together are just 0. Let's also take a look at how this is working here in February. In this case, it's multiplying a 0 times 1 minus 0. So these multiplied together are again 0. So now that we have the switches working, let's make a modification to actually include the amount of the contracts. Let's pop into the cell. We're going to tap F2. And what we're going to do on the end of the formula here is now multiply by a sum function, open the bracket, and now we're going to tap F2 once so that we can move down just like this. And we're now going to grab from here all the way back to the beginning, close the bracket, and hit enter. So let's pop back into the formula for 1 second with an F2, and now we're going to think about locking the cells. What we need over here is to lock the reference for G25. Let's tap the F4 key once, second time, and a third time. So now we have the column of G locked, but the rows are free to move. Now finally, we'll pop into the cell, copy with the Control C, highlight the entire range, Alt ES, down to formulas, and hit enter. Now let's do a couple quick spot checks to see how that sum function is working. Let's go into this first cell right here. We can see the sum function is effectively just summing one cell. Down at the end here, if we tap F2, we can see the sum function is grabbing almost the entire range that's in view. So well done on making it through that formula. As we can see now, we've got a formula which is working perfectly. In the next video, what we're going to do is go ahead and move it down into the area where we're working in the schedule below. See you there. So as you can see here, we're still up in the revenue accrued section, and we're about to copy this formula down. We're going to do it in a way that you may not have seen before. So we know that this formula is working perfectly, so we don't want to modify any cell references at all. So let's tap F2, select here using Control Shift and the left arrow, and now we're going to do a copy. So that's on the clipboard. And now we can hit Escape, hit the page down button. We want to make sure that we go here to the Focusrite cell, tap F2, and do a paste, Control V, and there you have it. We hit enter. So what we want to do now is pop into the cell, F2, and we want to link this formula now up to the end contract switch over here. So to do that, let's use the left arrow, go to the beginning of the formula, and we're going to tap F2 so that we can move over to the left, link to this cell, put in a multiplication symbol, and hit enter. Before we carry on, we better check the cell references in the locking. So let's pop into the cell once more and go over here. We actually want to do some locking in cell E47 here. So we're going to tap the F4 key 3 times to make sure that the E column is locked, but row 47 is unlocked. So now let's go into the cell one final time, and we're going to wrap everything that we've built now in a bracket. So left bracket here and a right bracket on the end. And the idea there is that we've finished building the formula for the end contracts, and now we're going to build the formula for the sync contracts. Now that we want to build the formula for the sync contracts, it's a great opportunity for us to tap the scroll lock key on our keyboard, and now we can move up like this so that we can see the schedule above. Tapping the scroll lock key once more allows us to get back to regular movement to our cursor. Now that we have everything nicely in view, we can go into the cell and tap F2, and we're going to build in now a plus sign to add in the formula for the synchronized contracts, and we're going to open the bracket like this, tap F2 once so we can move over. We want to grab the switch for the synchronized contracts, and while we're there, tap F2 3 times so that we can lock it to the column reference for C, and then we're going to multiply through by, we want to go up here like this and back 1 month and then close the bracket and hit enter. Now that last step may have seemed fast, but if we pop into the cell, we can see that the formula for the sync contracts is so much more simple than the formula for the end contracts. Next up, we're going to take a look at how to test this formula. Now to test the formula, we pop into the cell, do regular copy, Control C, and then we're going to highlight starting in February all the way down and all the way across to the end here, Alt ES, down to formulas and hit enter. So let's do some quick spot checks now. As we can see here, Atlantis Food is an end contract. We can see here the cash amount, and if we highlight up here, the accrued amount. Looks like it's working perfectly. So let's also do a quick spot check for a synchronized contract, like here, Railworks. We're going to highlight here the accrued amounts, and then down below, we can highlight the cash amounts, and we can see that also is working perfectly. Now that we know the formula is working really well, let's tap scroll lock on our screen again and just roll down like this so we can see everything we're doing and hit scroll lock a second time. Now, as you can see, we have not yet populated this January column here, and you can see the word load there. Now, these need to be manually loaded because the cash the company receives here will actually be dependent on a period which is prior to the timeline for our financial model. So what we need to do in here is actually simple. We're just going to load zeros in here that exactly match the PDF. And now this leads us down to the bottom here, total cash flow. Great opportunity to use one of our favorite keyboard shortcuts, Alt equals for an AutoSum. We hit enter, then we do a copy with Control C, highlight all the way across, Alt ES, down to formulas, and hit enter. So again, great job on building in one of the most complex formulas in this financial model. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk about corkscrews. You may be curious about what a corkscrew is in the context of financial modeling. Join us in the next video and we'll dive into it of our corkscrew, which we'll discuss later after we've built up some of the formulas. So I think you may be pleasantly surprised how easy these next few formulas are. Let's go here to additions and put in an equal sign, and then we're just going to scoot up here all the way up where it says total revenue. And this is the accrued revenue. And then we can hit enter, tap the scroll lock key, bring everything back into focus, and scroll lock once more. So now what we're going to do for reductions is we're going to say equals negative, and we're going to be subtracting this total cash flow here. Now let's use that great keyboard shortcut, Alt equals for an AutoSum, and hit enter. Next up, let's grab these three cells, copy them, highlight forward, Alt ES, and paste the formulas like that. Now what we're going to do is go up into this cell. We're going to put in an equal sign and then actually reach back one period to this cell here. And in fact, this is where the corkscrew gets its name. Now's an easy step. Let's grab these four cells here, copy, highlight all the way across to the end of the period, Alt ES, down to formulas, and hit enter. Now let's discuss where the corkscrew gets its name. So we're going to go up here and click on the formula section of the ribbon here. And we want to investigate the ability to trace precedence right here. So now let's try this with a keyboard shortcut. First of all, let's get into this cell and this cell only, where it says 5293. So tap the Alt key up here, M for formulas, and now here, P for trace precedence. Now let's scoot over to the next cell, Alt MP, and the next cell, Alt MP. Now we can clearly see the corkscrew pattern here. We start at the beginning and go down to an end balance, then over to the next period and down, over to the next one and down. Now this next column right here might be a great place to look at how the additions and reductions are changing things over time. We start with a certain beginning balance right here. We're adding in the additions, which is the accrued revenue amounts, and we're subtracting off the cash received to arrive at a new balance. So what we want to do next is remove all the arrows. So again, tap the Alt key, M for formulas, and now up here we can see A for remove arrows and another A for remove arrows again. So let's now go down to here, and we want to put in the formula for cash from accounts receivable, which is the beginning balance minus the ending balance, just like that. So let's make sure this formula makes sense to us now. We started with a beginning balance for the receivables here, and we've increased the receivables in this period. When we increase receivables, that is unfavorable from the company from a cash perspective. So this number is negative. So the last step now is to take this formula, do a copy, and highlight all the way across here, Alt ES, down to formulas, and hit enter. So great job completing yet another schedule in this financial model. In the next video, we're going to go over this area down here where it says load and there's a figure 4560. This is going to be the start of our corkscrew, which we'll discuss later. So what we want to do here in this short video is make sure that we absolutely understand the motivation behind us calculating accrued revenue up here and also the revenue received. So with that, it's so important to remember that we load in contracts here based on when the revenue was actually earned. By loading in the contracts based on the revenue and when it was earned, this gives us a very meaningful measure of profit down below. So then these total figures that we've aggregated down below then flow to the income statement, giving our income statement a meaningful measure of profit. So really we can say that our motivation for building this entire schedule that we're looking at right now is simply to provide us with a meaningful measure of the company's profit on the income statement. So we really built this schedule because we needed to measure the company's health in terms of its profitability. But for the schedule below, we built this one because we needed to measure the company's health in terms of cash flow. It's great for us to use a financial model to measure the company's profitability, but we also need to measure its health in terms of cash flow if we're going to do a more thorough analysis. Now that the model's built, we can really start using it as a tool. For instance, if we look out here, we can see a receivable balance of 6.5 million at the end of this forecast period. So what would happen if this company's clients start pushing back on the contracts a little bit? And up here, we could change all of these to end contracts by putting in a 0 and hitting enter. So this essentially enables us to quantify the unfavorable impact this would have. Now, if we look up to the end of the forecast period here, we can see the receivable balance has roughly doubled to about 12.5 million. So let's now quickly change the model back by inputting a 1 and then Control Enter to make those changes. So I think you would agree that there's parts of this course that we completed that were really tricky. So you should really be commended on your perseverance because now you have a powerful financial tool at your disposal that you can use to assess the company's revenue from an FP&A perspective. Now, in case this wasn't obvious from our previous comments, we're just absolutely delighted that you were able to join us in this particular FP&A course. And we're looking forward to seeing you in some of the other courses as well. We'll see you there.